You didn't stumble here by chance. Something in you was pulled, summoned even, as if the very fabric of your days wanted you to hear this message. You've wondered before if your smallest choices matter, if that sip of water, that minute of silence, that gentle pause is wasted when nothing outside you seems to change. But look closer. The illusion is that nothing moves. The truth is that everything shifts, silently, invisibly, beneath the surface of what you can see. What appears as stillness is really the hidden stirring of currents, waiting to rise. Consider this: reality does not measure in speed or spectacle, it listens in signal. And every act you take, every breath you make with intention, sends a pulse into the unseen network around you. It is not the grand gesture that rewrites your destiny. It is the rhythm of your signal, steady enough to echo through time. Think of yourself standing at the edge of a vast lake. The stone in your hand is small, almost weightless. You release it. The ripples move outward, effortless, unstoppable, touching shores you cannot even see. That is the secret hidden in your daily rituals. That is the quantum ripple effect. You may have believed transformation demands intensity, but here's the shift. What matters is coherence. One aligned act, repeated, becomes a signature the universe cannot ignore. The field responds not to drama, but to stability. And so the invitation is this pause. Breathe, choose. Not tomorrow, not after you've proven yourself. Now, let this moment become your first ripple, the activation of a signal that whispers, "I remember who I am." That ripple we left on the surface doesn't vanish, it spreads. And every spread carries a message. What's often missed is that the smallest of your actions are not neutral. They're encoded with frequency. They're speaking on your behalf into the field, whether you intend them to or not. This is the hidden language of micro-choices. Think of it like your conscious mind is a spotlight, narrow and focused, illuminating maybe 40 pieces of information per second. Meanwhile, your subconscious operates like an endless broadcasting tower, transmitting millions of signals every moment, signals that are constantly shaping what the quantum field mirrors back. The kicker: most of these broadcasts originate from habits so ordinary, you barely register them. Let's ground that in your life. You wake in the morning and, without thought, you reach for your phone, the light, the scroll, the flood of external information. That's not just a behavior, it's a broadcast. The message being transmitted is, I place the outside world before my inner world. I surrender coherence to urgency. Now imagine instead that you wake, sit up, breathe once with awareness, and whisper a word of alignment. Different act, different frequency. Your body relaxes, your nervous system settles, your field calibrates. You haven't changed the world yet, but you've changed your signal, and that matters, because the field responds to signal, not spectacle. Every choice you make becomes a tuning fork. Sip water while rushing and distracted, and your body absorbs the static of fragmentation. Sip water while present and grateful, and you broadcast coherence. Both are hydration. Only one becomes harmony. This is why repetition matters. A single ripple is beautiful, but when repeated daily, it becomes a wave pattern. It sets up resonance, and resonance, unlike isolated effort, carries momentum. If you've ever wondered why certain people seem to move through life with ease, it's often because their micro-choices have stabilized into a frequency that magnetizes clarity. They're not luckier, they're more coherent. Think of two people journaling. One jots half-hearted sentences while their mind races elsewhere, checking boxes to feel productive. The other writes slowly, listening inward, savoring the feel of ink on paper. Same visible habit, but one broadcasts static, the other broadcasts depth. One sends the field a message of distraction, the other sends a message of embodiment. And the field, sensitive and exact, responds accordingly. This is why you can't dismiss your smallest decisions. They are not whispers lost in the noise, they are the noise. They are the pattern. The quantum field is like an echo chamber, and every microchoice reverberates within it. Over time, the repetition of those choices creates your soundtrack. If your daily notes are discordant, you feel scattered. If your daily notes harmonize, you feel aligned. And here's the paradox: the human ego longs for the grand gesture. We tell ourselves transformation will come through massive effort, dramatic action, monumental change. Yet reality often bends most powerfully to the subtle, repeated signal of coherence. It is not about how loudly you shout your intention one day. It is about how consistently you whisper it every day until it becomes your default vibration. Pause here. Let yourself feel this truth in your own life. Recall a time when you kept a simple practice: a walk each morning, a glass of water before coffee, a moment of stillness before work. Remember how it didn't seem like much in the beginning. Yet weeks later, the texture of your life shifted. Your emotions softened. Your clarity sharpened. New opportunities appeared. That was not coincidence. That was resonance built from micro-choices. So the next time you tell yourself, "This habit is too small to matter," recognize what's really happening. Every act is a signal. Every signal contributes to your resonance. And resonance, once stabilized, does not just change your inner state, it changes the field around you. Which brings us to the next crucial threshold. If every micro-choice is a word in the hidden language you're speaking to reality, then mornings, the very first words of your daily sentence, carry extraordinary weight. What happens when your day begins not in chaos, but in coherence? What happens when the very first ripple sets the tone for all that follows? The question we ended on still echoes: what happens when the very first ripple of your day sets the tone for everything that follows? The answer is profound, because mornings aren't just routines. They're gateways. They are the entry point through which your entire frequency steps into the field. Think of waking not as flipping on a light switch, but as tuning an instrument. The first notes you play resonate throughout the entire song of your day. Begin with static, and static becomes your soundtrack. Begin with coherence, and clarity becomes your compass. Let's be honest. Many mornings start in chaos. You hit snooze 3 times, rush out of bed, check notifications, gulp down caffeine, already behind before you've even begun. That sequence is not random, it's a broadcast. You're sending the field a signal of urgency, fragmentation, and self-neglect. And the field, impartial as always, mirrors it back: more delays, more conflicts, more reactivity. But consider the alternative. You rise with intention. You place your feet on the floor slowly. Breathe once with awareness. Whisper a phrase that anchors your identity. You drink water before caffeine. Feel it move through your body's tea, and let gratitude rise for the miracle of hydration. Suddenly, the broadcast is different. You've sent a signal of presence, alignment, readiness, and the day, in turn, begins to organize itself around that coherence. This isn't about building elaborate rituals. You don't need a 2-hour practice, an expensive smoothie, or a sunrise yoga retreat. You need 30 seconds of truth. One aligned action, repeated, is more potent than a checklist of hollow habits, because the field measures not quantity but quality, not intensity but coherence. Think of 2 different people on the same morning. The first wakes late, races to dress, skips breakfast, curses the traffic. The second wakes on time, takes 2 minutes to breathe, writes 1 sentence of gratitude, and enters the car with steady breath. By noon, these 2 lives diverge drastically. One is scattered, reactive, drained. The other is grounded, open, perceptive. And that divergence began in the opening sequence, the first ripple. Why do mornings matter so much? Because your nervous system is most impressionable then. Your brain waves are transitioning from the dream state into waking consciousness. Your subconscious is still malleable, absorbing cues like wet clay. What you do in those moments imprints not just your mood, but your entire energetic blueprint for the day. Science calls this priming. Spiritual traditions call it consecration. In quantum terms, It's the moment you tune your field before reality amplifies it back to you. Now imagine mornings as a lab. Each day you wake is an experiment in frequency. You can throw yourself into chaos and watch chaos multiply, or you can seed coherence and let it grow. Over time, the difference is exponential. A week of chaotic mornings becomes a month of disorder, a year of static. A week of coherent openings becomes a month of flow, a year of resonance. And here's the gift: you are always one morning away from realignment. No matter how scattered yesterday was, the slate resets when you wake. The field doesn't hold grudge, it simply waits for the signal you choose today. So when you open your eyes tomorrow, remember you're not just waking up. You're stepping through a gateway. The first breath, the first action, the first thought is the ripple that sets your trajectory. Which brings us to a deeper paradox. You've been trained to believe success depends on effort, on grinding harder, on doing more. But the quantum perspective reveals a subtler truth: resonance carries more power than raw exertion. And that's where we must go next. That doorway of morning we just walked through leads us straight into a larger realization. Life doesn't bend to effort alone. It bends to resonance. This is a radical shift from what most of us have been taught. You've heard the story your whole life: work harder, grind longer, push more fiercely, and success will eventually break through. And yes, effort has its place. But in quantum reality, it is resonance, not force, that collapses possibility into form. Think of effort as pushing a boulder uphill. Strain, sweat, exhaustion. Sometimes the boulder moves, often it doesn't. Resonance is different. Resonance is like finding the precise vibration that makes the boulder roll by itself, carried by invisible currents. One is exhaustion, the other is flow. You can see this in everyday life. Two people go to the same gym. One arrives resentful, counting the minutes, checking their phone between sets. The other arrives present, honoring their body, grateful for its strength. Same effort in calories burned, same weight lifted, but the outcomes diverge over time. Why? Because the field doesn't amplify muscle strain, it amplifies frequency. Presence becomes coherence. Resentment becomes static. This principle extends far beyond the gym. Consider someone pursuing a dream project. If they sit down every day forcing themselves through the motions, dripping with doubt and impatience, their signal is cluttered. The field receives it, mirrors the clutter back, and opportunities stall. But another person might work fewer hours, yet with clarity, alignment, and trust. Their resonance is steady, and reality organizes around them, not because they tried harder, but because their signal was clean. You've likely felt the difference yourself. Have you ever poured relentless effort into something, studied harder, worked longer, pushed past exhaustion, only to find little progress? And then another time, when you were relaxed, centered, even playful, things clicked effortlessly. That wasn't luck. That was resonance aligning you with a timeline where doors open naturally. This doesn't mean effort is worthless. The action is still required. But in quantum terms, action without resonance is noise. Action infused with coherence becomes music. The difference lies in how you hold the action, not just what you do. Imagine a violin string. You can pull it tighter, harder, until it snaps. That's force. Or you can tune it precisely until it vibrates in harmony with the air around it. That's resonance. One creates tension, the other creates music. So ask yourself, are you forcing or are you tuning? Are your habits driven by desperation to change? Or are they infused with presence that declares, I am already aligned? Because the field doesn't respond to the hours you clock. It responds to the signal you embody while clocking them. This shift, choosing resonance over sheer exertion, liberates you from the cycle of burnout. It invites you to bring consciousness to the small, repeated actions, not as chores, but as transmissions. To drink water with presence, to walk with gratitude, to work with clarity, and then let those ripples accumulate into waves that carry you further than force ever could. And here's the paradoxical beauty. The the less you cling to outcomes, the faster outcomes arrive, because attachment generates static. It tells the field, I don't trust yet, but resonance clear, steady, embodied sends a signal of trust, and trust is magnetic. So here's the invitation bomb: shift from effort to resonance. Don't abandon action. Transform it. Let your habits be less about doing more and more about being coherent while doing. In this way, the quantum ripple grows steady, inevitable, which brings us naturally to the next truth. Resonance doesn't just change your mood. It reshapes your biology, your body, your nervous system. Your very cells are the instruments through which frequency plays. Let's step there next. We ended with resonance not just as a feeling, but as something your body carries. This is where the conversation deepens, because your biology is not just a passenger on this journey. It's the instrument broadcasting the signal. Your nervous system, your cells, your heartbeat, they are all transmitters in the grand network of the field. Think about your body as a tuning fork. Every thought, every micro-choice sends vibrations through your tissues, your hormones, your chemistry. That vibration doesn't stay locked inside you. It radiates outward. When you practice coherence through breath, gratitude, presence, your nervous system shifts from survival mode into regulation. Cortisol lowers, heart rhythms synchronize, digestion steadies. Science calls it parasympathetic activation. Spirit calls it peace. Quantum reality calls it alignment. Consider the mornings we discussed earlier. Wake and reach immediately for your phone, and your nervous system jolts. Adrenaline rises, stress chemistry floods your body. That cascade shapes not just your mood, but your biology for the next several hours. Now flip it, wake, breathe deeply, place a hand over your chest. Speak a word of alignment. Your vagus nerve activates. Your heartbeat slows. Your brain shifts toward coherence. The broadcast is calmer, steadier, clearer. This isn't abstract, it's practical. Your cells are listening. When you gulp water absent-mindedly, they absorb hydration as routine. But when you sip with presence, your nervous system relaxes. Your digestive system opens, and the same water becomes more deeply nourishing. The act is the same, the signal is different, and the body, being both receiver and amplifier, translates that difference into a ripple the field can feel. It's no accident that ancient traditions centered around bodily rituals, bowing, chanting, breathing, fasting, stretching. They weren't arbitrary practices. They were ways of tuning biology to coherence. They recognized that the body itself is a sacred transmitter. Modern science is catching glimpses of this truth. Studies on heart rate variability, for instance, show that when your heart rhythm is smooth and consistent, the rest of your physiology organizes into harmony. And beyond the body, people around you unconsciously sense this coherence. That's why someone deeply grounded feels magnetic, even without words. Their biology is broadcasting resonance, and the field amplifies it. But here's the trap many fall into, trying to force biology through willpower. Overtraining, over-dieting, obsessing about health in ways that create more stress than relief. The field doesn't mirror your intentions alone, it mirrors your embodied frequency. If your body is tense, exhausted, panicked, no affirmation can override that signal. Coherence cannot be faked, it must be embodied. So what does this mean for your habits? It means the most profound transformation isn't found in adding more steps to your checklist. It's in shifting how you embody the steps you already take. A minute of breathing with full awareness can reset your nervous system more deeply than an hour of unconscious meditation. A few bites of food eaten in gratitude can tune your biology more fully than a perfectly healthy meal eaten in judgment and stress. When your biology is coherent, your signal is clear. And when your signal is clear, the field reflects it back unmistakably. This is the essence of embodied resonance. You become not just someone practicing alignment, but someone broadcasting it at every cellular level. And here's the revelation: once you understand your body as a transmitter, you begin to realize that each repeated habit is not just shaping behavior, it's shaping biology, which in turn sculpts reality. And that takes us straight into the realm of probability waves, pathways, and how each choice doesn't just change your body, but the timeline you stand upon. We just explored how the body itself broadcasts frequency. Now let's widen the lens and step into the quantum view. Each choice you make doesn't just adjust your biology. It opens a probability wave. It creates a pathway. And those pathways form the map of your future. Think of reality not as one straight line, but as a vast sea of overlapping potentials. Every habit, every micro-decision is like placing your foot on one of those invisible stepping stones. Repeat the step, and the stone solidifies into a path. Abandon it, and the path begins to fade. But here's the liberating truth: once a path has been touched, it never fully disappears. It remains available, waiting for you to return. This is why so many people feel frustration when they start and stop habits. They carry the story of failure: I can't stay consistent. I always quit. But from a quantum perspective, that's not failure, that's exploration. Each attempt creates a probability wave. Each return strengthens it. The pathway never erases, it simply waits for your next step. Imagine someone who begins a meditation practice. They keep it for 2 weeks, then fall away. Months later, they try again. Each return feels like starting over. But the truth is, their second attempt is easier. Why? Because the pathway already exists. Their system remembers. The frequency is familiar. That memory is not weakness. It's evidence of probability waves waiting to be reactivated. Your habits are not isolated tasks. They are portals. When you breathe with awareness, you're not just calming your body, you're collapsing a probability wave where clarity and peace exist. When you reach for water with presence, you're not just hydrating, you're aligning with a pathway where vitality strengthens. And when you choose distraction, chaos, or self-neglect, you're opening pathways into timelines of disorder. Every choice is a navigation, a steering of your vessel into one frequency or another. This is why consistency matters so much. Not because the universe keeps score, but because pathways strengthen with repetition. The more often you step onto a coherent path, the more stable that timeline becomes. Eventually, it becomes the dominant probability, the reality that feels inevitable. This is how habits reshape identity. They don't just change what you do, they solidify who you are in the field. Think of a forest trail. Walk it once, and the grass bends slightly. Walk it daily, and the path becomes clear, unmistakable, easy to travel. Your choices work the same way. One aligned action bends the grass. Repetition clears the trail. Soon, it's the natural route your consciousness takes. Now, here's the paradox most people miss. Even your abandoned attempts contribute. Every time you chose alignment, even briefly, you etched a line into the field. That etching remains. This is why returning to a practice often feels like remembering rather than inventing. You're not starting from zero. You're reactivating probability waves that already exist, waiting for you to inhabit them fully. So instead of labeling yourself inconsistent, consider this: you are experimenting with pathways. You are mapping probabilities, and each choice, whether continued or abandoned, has carved a groove in the field that can be re-entered at any moment. This perspective transforms failure into research, struggle into training, return into renewal. Because the field does not punish you for stopping, it simply waits for your next broadcast. And the moment you choose again, the pathway lights up beneath your feet. This brings us to something vital. Pathways are powerful, but they come alive most vividly through story. Nothing illustrates the ripple of probability waves better than the lives of people who chose one small action, repeated it, and found themselves living realities they once thought unreachable. Let's step into those stories next. Those probability waves we just mapped out. They're not theory. They're lived. They're embodied in real people whose tiny choices became ripples that carved entire new pathways of existence. And their stories reveal a truth. You can feel the smallest act, repeated, can transform everything. Take the writer who believed her creativity had dried up. For years, she carried the weight of unwritten words. Each time she tried to start, self-doubt rose. I don't have the time. I don't know how. I'll fail anyway. That loop kept her trapped in paralysis. Until one morning, she made a promise: just 5 minutes of journaling a day. No book, no deadline, no pressure, just 5 minutes. At first, it felt pointless. But weeks passed, and something shifted. Thoughts loosened. Language returned. A year later, she held a finished manuscript. That ripple began with 5 minutes that seemed insignificant. The path was always there. She simply walked it long enough for it to solidify. Or think of the man who felt estranged from his body. He carried shame, convinced it was too late to begin again. No expensive trainer, no fancy program, just a decision walk for 10 minutes each day. Shoes on, step outside, move. 10 minutes turned to 20, then 30. The ripple widened. He started drinking more water, choosing better food, sleeping deeper. 2 years later, not only had his body transformed, but he became a guide for others. The path of coherence he once doubted was possible became his new identity. Then there's the young woman who redirected energy by pausing a single daily purchase. Instead of her usual coffee shop indulgence, she funneled that money into a savings account. At first, it was just $6, barely noticeable. But the ritual carried a deeper signal. I am honoring my future self. Over time, that account grew not only in numbers, but in self-trust. She learned about investing, built resources, launched a dream project. The field mirrored the frequency she had broadcast: stewardship, respect, empowerment. What unites these stories is not intensity, it's presence. None of them began with grand gestures. They began with small stones cast into the still lake of daily life. And because those stones were dropped consistently, ripples became currents, and currents became timelines that altered destinies. Now you might think, but what about the times I started and stopped, the promises I made to myself and broke? Here's the truth. Those too are part of your story. They are not evidence of weakness. They are research. Every attempt has carved a groove in the field. Every return has strengthened it. The field does not erase your effort. It remembers. And when you step back onto that path, the frequency is easier to access than the first time you tried. This is why stories matter. Because when you hear someone else's ripple, it activates your own. It reminds you that transformation doesn't require perfect discipline or monumental strength. It requires remembering that small is sacred. So pause and reflect. What's the story you're writing now? Through the habits you repeat daily. What broadcast is your life transmitting, even in private moments when no one is watching? Because the truth is, others are touched by your ripples whether you realize it or not. And that opens the next revelation. Your habits are not only personal, they are collective. Your ripples travel into the lives of others, reshaping more than your own timeline. And that's where the ripple effect becomes exponential. The stories of transformation remind us that ripples rarely stop at the edge of your own life. They extend outward, touching the lives of others in ways you may never see. This is the collective summation of the ripple effect, the recognition that your private coherence becomes public resonance. Think about the last time you were around someone deeply grounded. They didn't need to say much. Simply being in their presence made you feel calmer, steadier, perhaps even inspired. That wasn't charisma. That was coherence. Their signal, embodied and repeated through daily habits, reached you. You felt it, and without realizing, you mirrored some of it back. The same is true in reverse. A person who lives in constant static, who begins each day in chaos, transmits agitation into their environment. Their children absorb it. Their co-workers sense it. Their community mirrors it. We underestimate how contagious frequency can be. Habits aren't just private choices. They're contracts with reality that spill into the collective field. This is why the myth of it only affects me is so misleading. Your choice to breathe before reacting may prevent a conflict that ripples through your family. Your decision to drink water with intention might shift your mood enough to change the tone of a meeting, which influences the trajectory of a project, which alters opportunities for others. You'll never fully track the web of cause and effect, but the field is woven from these invisible threads. Consider the parent who chooses presence each morning instead of rushing. Their child grows up sensing steadiness, and that steadiness shapes how they move through life. Or the leader who centers themselves before speaking, creating resonance in the room that influences every decision made. These ripples are not dramatic, they're subtle, but over time they reshape the fabric of families, communities, and even cultures. Ancient traditions understood this. Rituals were rarely personal, they were communal. A chant, a prayer, a fire lit at dawn wasn't just for one individual's growth. It was a frequency broadcast for the tribe, the village, the collective. And in a quantum sense, that hasn't changed. Your morning breath, your daily ritual, your smallest act of alignment is part of a shared transmission shaping humanity's field. Now pause and think about legacy. Every time you choose coherence over chaos, you're not just shaping your own timeline, you're planting seeds in the collective field. Future generations inherit those frequencies. When you break a cycle of neglect or self-sabotage, you're not only freeing yourself, you're freeing your children, their children, and anyone who witnesses your shift. This is how ancestral patterns dissolve, not through monumental declarations, but through the quiet consistency of small, sacred choices. And here's the paradox: you might never know the impact of your ripple. You may never see the conflict avoided, the opportunity created, the heart softened because of your broadcast. But invisibility doesn't mean insignificance. The most powerful currents in the ocean are unseen. The same is true here. So ask yourself, what frequency are you adding to the collective field today? Is it agitation or alignment, neglect or presence, complaint or gratitude? Because the field listens not just to your words, but to the rhythm of your choices. And when enough of us choose coherence, the ripples merge. They amplify. They become waves that shift the trajectory of humanity itself. This is the hidden sacredness of daily habits. They are not small, not private, not meaningless. They are the way you contribute to the collective evolution of consciousness. Which brings us naturally to the next threshold. If your ripples are constantly shaping the collective, then the most potent ones are those that become automatic. Habits practiced long enough slip beneath conscious effort and broadcast unconsciously, 24 hours a day. Let's step into that truth. We left with the recognition that your ripples spill outward into the collective. Now let's bring it closer again, to the level of the unconscious, the hidden realm where most of your broadcasting happens. Because here's the truth. What you practice consciously long enough becomes unconscious. And what becomes unconscious doesn't just influence your life sometimes. It shapes your reality all the time. Think of driving. In the beginning, you had to focus on every action: mirror, signal, gear, brake. Over time, the practice slipped below awareness. Now you can navigate an entire journey while holding a conversation. Habits work the same way. At first, presence requires effort. You must remind yourself to breathe, to pause, to sip water with gratitude. But repetition rewires the subconscious. Soon, those acts become default. And once they are default, your unconscious mind, processing millions of signals each second, broadcasts them continuously into the field without effort. Consider gratitude. If you practice it intentionally each night over weeks, your system begins to anticipate it. Eventually, you don't need to remember. Gratitude arises naturally at meals, in conversations, in waking moments. It's not forced, it's automatic. And here's the quantum secret: unconscious gratitude broadcasts 24 hours a day, even when you're not thinking about it. The field hears the signal constantly. Compare that to someone who practices gratitude 5 minutes each morning, but spends the rest of the day complaining unconsciously. Which broadcast do you think the field responds to more strongly? This is why unconscious programming is so vital. Your conscious rituals are important, but their true power lies in repetition, until they shift your baseline, until presence becomes who you are, not what you try, until alignment is your natural rhythm, not your occasional practice. Now pause and realize this can work both ways. Negative patterns also automate. If you consistently reach for distraction, criticize yourself, or react in anger, those choices too become unconscious programs, and they broadcast relentlessly, shaping a field of static. This is why awareness is key. You're always transmitting. The question isn't if you're broadcasting, it's what you're broadcasting unconsciously. Imagine two people at dinner. One eats quickly, phone in hand, unconsciously broadcasting rush and disconnection. The other eats slowly, phone aside, tasting each bite, unconsciously broadcasting gratitude and presence. They may never speak to each other, yet their frequencies ripple into the collective field, influencing realities far beyond the dinner table. So how do you shift unconscious programming? Through repetition? Yes, but not through force. Through coherence. 1 minute of full presence daily, repeated long enough, rewires the baseline more deeply than an hour of distracted effort. The subconscious doesn't measure quantity, it registers frequency. This is why small sacred habits are more powerful than grand gestures, because they're sustainable, they repeat, they sink beneath conscious effort and become the invisible rhythm of your being. And when that happens, your life feels different. People around you notice something subtle, lighter energy, calmer presence, clearer magnetism. They may not know why, but the field does. The field is reflecting the new unconscious program you've stabilized. So, if you've ever wondered why certain people seem magnetic, it's rarely because of what they're doing in the spotlight. It's because of what they've automated in the shadows. Their unconscious habits broadcast coherence all the time, and the field can't help but mirror it back. This is the deeper dimension of the ripple effect. You are not just shaping moments, you are programming timelines. Once your unconscious carries the signature of coherence, reality begins to organize around you effortlessly. And this takes us to the final threshold in this journey, the concept of quantum triggers, small sacred habits that act as ignition points, contracts with the universe, anchoring who you truly are. We've arrived at the edge of something crucial. If unconscious programming is the silent rhythm shaping your days, then quantum triggers are the keys that tune the entire instrument. They are not just habits in the conventional sense. They are ignition points, micro actions that, when chosen with coherence, broadcast an identity contract to the universe. Think of a trigger as a doorway. It doesn't require hours of commitment or elaborate ritual. It requires presence in a precise act that declares, "This is who I am." The moment you repeat it consistently, the field begins to reorganize around that declaration. The action may be small, placing your feet on the floor with intention, whispering one phrase of alignment, taking a conscious sip of water. Yet in quantum terms, it's massive. It tells the universe, "I honor my word to myself. I choose coherence. I am becoming the one I already glimpse within me." These triggers work because they anchor identity. They move you beyond behavior modification into embodiment. Each time you repeat the trigger, you're not just doing something, you're signing a contract with reality. You're confirming to the field, "This is my frequency now." And the field, impartial and precise, mirrors that contract back. Imagine someone who decides their quantum trigger is 1 minute of stillness each morning. Day after day, they pause, breathe, center. That 1 minute doesn't stay small. It ripples into calmer conversations, clearer choices, steadier moods. It rewires how they speak, how they respond, how they imagine their future. Over months, the ripple becomes a current strong enough to shift their entire trajectory, not because they forced themselves into massive change, but because they honored a single contract repeatedly until it became identity. Now consider the opposite. Someone else hits snooze repeatedly, muttering promises they never keep. Their trigger is inconsistency itself. And without realizing, they've signed a contract too, a broadcast of self-betrayal. The field reflects it. Opportunities slide away, relationships strain, confidence erodes, not out of punishment, but because the universe mirrors what is consistently declared. This is the hidden truth. Your habits aren't just routines. They are vows. Each repetition, silent or loud, tells the field who you believe yourself to be. And the field, ever faithful, responds to that belief. So how do you choose your trigger? Begin by asking, what's one small act that feels alive, resonant, authentic? Not a performance, not a borrowed ritual, but something that makes you feel like your truest self. Maybe it's journaling a single sentence, maybe it's stretching for 60 seconds, maybe it's placing a hand on your chest and speaking the words, "I am here," once chosen. Treat it as sacred. Repeat it daily, not as an obligation, but as a declaration. Over time, that declaration moves beneath conscious effort. It becomes unconscious. It becomes your baseline. And once it's baseline, your identity shifts. You no longer do the trigger, you are the person who embodies it. And that's when the field has no choice but to respond with coherence. This is why the quantum ripple effect is inseparable from identity. Because in truth, your habits are not just what you practice. They are who you are becoming. Every choice is a signature. Every repetition is a contract. Every ripple is an identity declaring itself into the field. So here is the question, the one that remains: what contract will you sign tomorrow morning? What trigger will you honor? Not as a task, but as a declaration of your becoming, because the universe is listening. The field is waiting, and the identity you long for is already encoded in the ripple you choose today. We ended with the question of contracts: what vow you'll honor tomorrow morning, what ripple you'll choose to send. Let's soften here. Let's return to the rhythm beneath everything we've spoken. Because after all the imagery, all the mechanics, all the revelations, what remains is simple presence. Take a breath. Feel the body that carried you through this message. Remember that not one sip of water, not one mindful breath, not one whispered phrase has ever been wasted. Even the days you abandoned your practice, even the moments you forgot, the ripples remained. They did not vanish. They folded into the field, waiting for you to return. That's the gift of rhythm. It doesn't demand perfection, only remembrance. You're not building your life from scratch. You're remembering it into form. Every habit is a memory of who you already are, reawakened in the present moment, and every ripple is evidence that the universe never ignores your signal. So let go of the pressure for monumental change. Transformation does not need a spotlight. It happens in the quiet, in the invisible, in the repetition of small sacred acts. A hand placed over the heart, a single stretch before work, a pause before speaking. These are the doorways. These are the ripples. And when those ripples gather, when they merge into waves, you find yourself living as someone you once only imagined, not because you forced yourself there, but because you broadcasted it into being. Identity shaped not by intensity, but by resonance. So as we close, I ask you gently, what ripple will you send today? What small, sacred act will you honor as a contract with yourself? It doesn't need to impress anyone. It doesn't need to be grand. It only needs to be true, because the field is listening, the universe is mirroring, and your future self is already waiting, standing on the shore, watching the ripples you've begun. Step toward them. One choice at a time. Step toward coherence. Step toward the life that remembers you into wholeness.